Hey everybody, welcome to episode 384 of The Virtual Couch. I'm your host, Tony Overbay. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, host of Waking Up to Narcissism, Murder on the Couch, Waking Up to Narcissism, The Question and Answer. And one quick plug, please go check out the Linktree link in the show notes. And my marriage course, the Magnetic Marriage Course, is about to be up and running again. And it has been updated and it is back and better than ever. So I would love to have you learn how to communicate more effectively in your marriage. So just find that link and you'll be hearing more information soon. But I want to get to the interview today. Today, I am interviewing a legitimate filmmaker, Reid Harkness. Reid was kind enough to come on the podcast and talk about his film, Sam Now. And I thought the best way to give an introduction to the film itself is to go over to the words of a legitimate film reviewer. So from RogerEbert.com, Matt Zoller Seitz wrote a review of the movie, Sam Now, and he gave it 4 stars. But there's 2 paragraphs that I wanted to read, maybe 3 paragraphs from this review. And then we'll get to that interview because I have so many thoughts about this. This movie is, well, let me read from Matt from RogerEbert.com. He said, Sam Now is a gentle, empathetic movie that will be unbearably intense for viewers who fear abandonment, but that might prove to be healing, or at least enlightening if they can stick with it to the end. Constructed of home movies and family interviews spanning 24 years, director Reid Harkness's documentary tells a painful and complicated story from his own life. His stepmother, Jois, disappeared one day in 2000 without warning or any further contact or explanation. And even though they were separated, her leaving shocked her husband Randy and their sons Sam and Jared, who were in elementary school at the time, and Reid, then a teenager. And I will link to the review in the show notes as well because it's wonderful, but I would highly encourage you to watch the movie, listen to the interview, and then go back in and read the review because he does go into a lot of detail in the review. But one of the things that I think was so powerful, and this next paragraph sums it up, but it says most of the film's emphasis is on the family Jois abandoned, especially Sam, whose sweet smile and open face start to seem more haunted as the tale goes on. But let me add in there's enough humor, and there are just so many powerful moments that I hope this doesn't sound like this is just a doom and gloom kind of movie, because it's not. It's beautiful, and it's magical, and it's funny, and it's powerful, and it makes you laugh and cry and all of the emotions, which as a therapist, I appreciate that. It's nice to be able to feel a lot of different things and sit with that and see what it brings up for you. But it says much of the first half is about Reid and Sam embarking on a 2-person odyssey to find Jois, playing private detective by diving into search engines and questioning friends and relatives, including Jois's mother and aunt. But here's the main part. It surely didn't occur to either of the young storytellers that they were doing something that most of their elders wouldn't be skilled enough or emotionally tough enough to do. But everything about their quest is astounding, including the nerve and faith required to embark on such a journey in the first place. The incisive questions that then 20-something Reid asked various interviewees who knew Jois and were destroyed by her disappearance. The raw honesty and perceptiveness of the answers he gets, even from subjects who resist his probing. And most of all, the openness and emotional transparency of his brother, leading man, and best friend Sam. So I would encourage you to listen to the interview, go find the movie Sam Now, and I think that watch it and then come back, maybe even listen to the interview again. And I'm going to record a little bit more after the interview, that just some additional thoughts that I had that I'd hoped that we would get to in the interview with Reid, but we just simply ran out of time. They may make sense out of context, but I think that there's some just really fascinating things that I pulled out of the movie. And so I would love to get your feedback. If you've seen the movie, or after you do see the movie, please reach out to me at contact@tonyoverbay.com. Let me know what you think and send in your questions. And maybe this will spark another podcast episode where we can talk more about attachment or emotional immaturity, and maybe we can even coax Reid back on. Let's get to my interview with Reid Harkness, the director of Sam Now. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that interview with Reid, and I realize now as I'm looking over my Google document that this almost needs to be a director's cut or something that you would put on the DVD. I don't know if there are DVDs anymore, but on streaming, and you could maybe put a separate audio track on and just listen to some commentary. Because if you haven't seen the movie, this might seem a bit out of context. But I'll just take you on my train of thought on a few different things now. There were scenes where there was a lot of conversation after Jois had disappeared by the family, by the adults in the family. And again, the journey was Reid and Sam. But here are some of the things that I took down that I just thought were interesting. there was an interview with the other brother, Jared, and he said that I forget, I believe it was Reid who said, does it feel like she doesn't care? And he said, sometimes, but it just doesn't fit because she never acted this way before. And that's one of those, there was so much where I was very curious about the concepts around confabulated memory. Did Jared need it to have not made sense? And were there really no signs that she seemed that disengaged or had been checked out maybe of the relationship, of her marriage, of her life, that and allowed her to be able to escape? There was an interview with Jois's mom. I just put grandma. When Jois first left, we never brought it up. And then they turned to a cousin, Ned. The way the situation with Jois has been dealt with, it hasn't been dealt with. It seems malicious, and the kids will be dealing with this for the rest of their lives. And then an aunt said, I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. And then there was a concept where, I forget who said it, but said the best thing for Randy, who was the dad, to do was to ignore it. And then they cut to Randy, and he said she was a good mother to her kids. And then I put in here my own commentary, other than the fact that she disappeared off the face of the planet. But Randy at one point also said, I didn't realize how much Jared needed his mother, Sam too, but I just really had no desire to interact with her. And there were a couple of other things I thought that we didn't get into. We talked about when they met her at a restaurant. She said, I had no control. This is a way to control my relationship with the kids. I had to save myself. I had to get out of the control of everybody else. And it was difficult, but it was more difficult to not leave, she said. And she said, I'll go down in history as the woman who broke a lot of rules, but I'm happy. At one point, Reid was talking with Sam, and Reid said, I don't think she really needed to leave you guys. I don't think you have to believe that she did the right thing, because she didn't. But Sam said, I don't think there's a lot to be gained from thinking that she did the wrong thing. And I thought that was really interesting. The therapist in me said, okay, Reid is saying, hey, we can have some acceptance here that she didn't need to leave you, and perhaps it wasn't the right thing. But, and I work with people a lot where we talk about acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance, that happened, and not even trying to make as much sense or meaning out of it, so we can just accept it and then move forward. And then Sam, I think, was almost throwing a little bit more of a cognitive behavioral therapy spin on here, which I can appreciate right now, where he was saying, okay, I don't think there's a lot to be gained from thinking that she did the wrong thing. So in his mind, maybe that needed to be the, you know what, she did the best she could, which is really a change your thoughts and leads to different emotions and behaviors kind of a vibe. There was the powerful part that I wanted to talk with Reid a little bit more was when he was interviewing Sam later, I think 10 years later. He said, even finding her, the connection is severed. And he said, later in my adult life, I found that I was concerned about me abandoning somebody and that I have abandonment issues. So Sam himself started talking about how he recognized that these abandonment issues were starting to pop up in his adult relationships. And he said, Jois's mom abandoned her. She did what she could. So some of the backstory is Jois was adopted as a baby. And so I wondered, and this is the part that this is just me speculating, that her mom actually abandoned her. But then at one point, Jois said she did what she could and it was okay. She said it really was okay. There's no way that I could ever tell her, though, about my childhood because it would be too awful. And then Jois talked about her adopted mom, and they interviewed her in the movie. And Jois said, my mother and I never got along. We were always at odds. I always knew I was adopted. I was always reminded that they had the option of sending me back to eat fish heads and rice back at the orphanage, and they leveraged it all throughout my childhood. And then, and I thought it was such good filmmaking, Reid cuts directly to then an interview with Jois's adopted mom, grandma, and Jois's mom said, you know, we really have no regrets. We never looked at her as being adopted. She was just one of the kids. And I just thought that was so interesting. But I could go on, but I highly do recommend the film, and I recommend that you rent it, buy it, and jot down some notes and send them in, and let's have a little bit of a book club or a movie club, because I think that this hits on so many different themes, from abandonment and attachment to families that just don't deal with a lot of discomfort or pain. And I don't know how brave the kids were to try and figure out what happened to Jois. Reid, toward the end, said something that I thought was brilliant, and then we'll wrap things up. Reid said, we replay our same scenes over and over. Everybody is playing up their own version of a story that came before. And then I think I put, it takes severe trauma to cause people to go get the help to try and stop the cycle or change the cycle. If Reid said that, then Reid, that's an even better quote than I thought it was. But I believe that he said that thing that we play up the own version of the story that came before. And I think I was putting in the notes the part about that it really does take something like this. But then people have to go get help to start to change the dynamics in a family to cause that generational healing. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I really hope that you will go watch the movie, send me your comments, your feedback, and taking us out per usual is the wonderful, the talented Aurora Florence with her song It's Wonderful, and we will see you next time on the Virtual Couch. Reid Harkness, welcome to the Virtual Couch, eventually to Waking Up to Narcissism, and then any other podcast franchise that I maintain, because I really was that impressed with the movie, and I'm really excited to have you on here. So I want to share this shout out from the rooftop. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tony. It's good to be here.
Yeah. And this is where I'm going to kind of claim the whole healthy ego, or I've done 400 or 500 podcasts. So I have a lot of people that are maybe listen or familiar with my stuff. So this is where I want to just let you know I prepared, and maybe you're dealing with people that prepare all the time, but I like to think that I just like that vibe, the back and forth. But man, when I started watching Sam now, and I'm going to look over on another screen often, because I found myself wanting to just be and listen and take it in. But I was furiously taking notes and quotes and going back. And because, I mean, there are people in my women's Facebook group that mentioned it, and they just said, this has been incredible. And then true story, and I promise I will let you talk soon. Then I said, I felt like I was doing a flex, as the kids say. And I just said, oh, let me see if I can reach out and get him on the podcast. But I thought, well, he probably won't respond. You did. I felt so validated. And so then the interview was drawn near, and I thought, man, I really want to do this the right way, because I love documentaries, and people in this group that I trust said it's powerful. And then it really was. And so then the therapist in me just, I went from, oh, this will be a great podcast interview, to holy cow, this is what I deal with as a therapist every day. And so I just really appreciate the content that you put out.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that means a lot.
Okay.
It's been a crazy long journey, labor of love project for me. I've had to wear very many hats. I'm a family member. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm an artist. Also, I'm somebody that, has dealt with a fair amount of really difficult relationships. So some of that gave me the fuel to dive really deep into these ideas and themes.
Well, okay, a couple of things I thought were just phenomenal is the fact that when did you first have your love of film? And I mean, you were that kid that looks like was running around filming. Were you filming everything? And at what age did that start? When did you know that this is what I just wanted to do?
Such a good question. I mean, the earliest memories I have of doing that were, I used to make little movie sets with like garden snails before I ever had access to a camera.
Good. Okay.
But then after that, I would make movie sets out of clay without a camera.
Wow.
And then when the claymation specials were going on, the Will Vinton and all that.
Yeah.
And then my first camera was a PXL 2000, which was this amazing Fisher Price camera that took audio cassette tapes and you could make videos with them.
Wow.
But like a friend borrowed it and broke it like a week later, and I was so devastated. I couldn't wait to get my hands on another camera. And it was really my grandmother's VHS camera that was like my first love for like, a camera I could actually use. And my cousins and brothers and I would just spend hours making just shooting these videos, scenes. It was almost like a cross between Saturday Night Live and, some unscripted, just like hitting each other with sticks thing. Sometimes we'd have more of a concept, a storyline, and sometimes it was just like, hey, this would be fun, and
An improv almost?
Yeah, elements of, Jackass or something too, where it's like we're just doing goofy prank-like things. But then there's like moments where we're like, that tip into like making art, and that's the direction I ended up going. I was like, I want to try to make films. I want to try to make like, and I was inspired. I went to a lot of art house cinema, even as a young person. My grandmother would take me, and I was really inspired by foreign films, and
really,
I think and I had seen Michael Apted's Up series at a really young age, and that inspired me. So as like 18, 19, I start making these films with my younger brother, Sam. He's my half brother. And that's the beginning of our journey.
Well, and what I dig about this too, and if I'm going to pull the therapist card out a lot here today, is that I often talk about the concept of, you get your sense of self from external validation as a kid, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. And so do you feel like, yeah, were you getting that validation? Were you getting that support? Or were you hearing a lot of times where, hey, that's a fun thing to do, but it will never turn into anything? Or were people going, yeah, that's nice, Reid. Yeah, you'll be a filmmaker someday. Sure. Now go out and film the snails.
My mom is a potter. She works in clay, and she does both like pottery and clay art. So she makes sculptures and things. And so I had that influence, and knew that being a working artist was a modality that could happen. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the film stuff, there was a lot of resistance. I mean, there was like a lot of. I wasn't, like funneled into film school. I didn't feel like I had money to attend anything like that. I didn't have any film classes or anything. So I was making it up and really, really forging my way in a world that was unknown. And that kind of like meeting of resistance was kind of the thing that was the most liberating, because the films that I would make, my brother was the star subject. We would go on these epic adventure road trips to shoot these little Super 8 experimental films that were really about these ideas of growing up.
Did you have that goal the entire time? And I have this later, but let's talk about it right now. Why the Blue Panther? I mean, was that your way to get Sam to do the things you wanted him to do, to take on this alter ego, or what was,
Yeah, well, I'll talk about that. Okay, so yeah, the movies were, yes, they were about like growing up themes. I was, was still a teenager. I was like still recovering from a lot of and understanding the experience I had just gone through, still growing up personally myself, and then trying to work out some of these ideas through film. And Sam was my actor. And then the Blue Panther character is a character Sam made up one day, and he started making his own films about that character. And then there's a point that's introduced in the movie where he wants to use that character. He wants to use it in our next film. And I just shoot back at him, how about the Blue Panther finds his mom? Which was the beginning of our conversation about what do we do about this big elephant in the room of my stepmom, Sam's biological mom, has been missing for about 3 years.
And that gets us into it. And boy, I have to then say, one of my favorite scenes, though, was the Blue Panther. What was it? It was at UCLA or USC going into... How hard was it to get the lady to go along with that scene? The lady behind the counter, was that difficult, or was she on board right away?
Full disclosure, that's an actor.
Okay, thank
so
you.
These are so yeah. The a little bit of a spoiler. The Blue Panther, the sequences are reenactments that were shot like a year and a half after we go on this road trip. Okay. We were shooting like a lot of film on the road trip, but we interweave in the movie. So, as I said, the way that this comes about of like this, how we approach this elephant in the room is, how about the Blue Panther finds his mom? What we end up actually doing is going on a road trip with our real selves. Okay. in my dad's borrowed minivan, and driving all the way from Seattle to Southern California with barely any evidence or any clues about where she could be. And I felt like it was most authentic to follow through with what we said we would do, which was, how about the Blue Panther finds his mom? Yeah. And so we also shoot that as a little bit of lighthearted relief to this like kind of very intense thing, but it also helps you understand our fictional world, which I think adds to the personality, the sort of like characteristics of who we are, what we're up to.
Well, Reid, can I tell you, and I got to be honest, I mean, I've done a lot of interviews. I've never really interviewed a filmmaker, and I Films were my happy place. I mean, I love them to this day. I worked at a movie store or a video rental store while I went through college. I had a dollar theater when I was away at college, far from home, and I would disappear into movies. I mean, and then I love documentaries, which I think is a big reason I became a therapist. I mean, I'm having a cathartic moment right now, but just I really hearing this is so amazing because the way you laid it out, it makes sense, and it was really it was beautiful, and it made such a difficult topic. I don't know. I enjoyed it, and I found that was a really fascinating thing. So I love hearing this behind the scenes. And so now, right? So maybe if we get to that, and you talked about it a little bit, and I'm sure I probably talked about it in the opening, but how old was Sam when his mom disappeared? And it literally was just, she was just gone, right?
Yes. Yeah. So beginning of his freshman year of high school.
Wow.
She disappeared like out of the blue, and it was like just like gone in the night,
Wow.
and no notes or no information was given to my brothers about her leaving, where she had to go, why she had to go.
Yeah.
And this is, all coming at a point when they had a stable connection with her where, she was divorced from my dad, but they were just going between houses and
Okay.
and Seattle. And I had a good relationship with her too. And my last memories before she left were like picking up Sam to go shoot one of our little films. And,
Wow.
and I remember her being really supportive and encouraging of that. And, like, I'm so glad that you're taking Sam out to do these things. And she seemed happy and comfortable. And in my, teenage mind, I didn't see anything strange about the picture.
And tell me if I'm remembering this correctly, but she disappeared for, was it a few months, came back, and then disappeared again for the years?
Yes,
So
and
was
that
this
also
yeah.
happens. But it was
Okay.
the first time had a story to it that was like she was going on a seminar. She was going on to do a thing, and I think it was something like a seminar or something that or some work that or something involved in some. She had gone back to school and was doing studies and going to the seminar that was connected to that. So I think the first time our family felt like it was like, okay, that makes sense. She's going on a retreat, and going to do something she wants to do. But the next time was like completely different. And it was weird because she stayed away for longer than we expected.
Yeah.
But like the next time was like, okay. And it was really an extension. It was like she was back for just a short time and then she was gone again.
So then I don't know, was there a thought that something nefarious had happened, or because of that she had been gone and came back, that must be that? And I think this maybe gets into the theme of the... I've got a bunch of quotes down about where people don't really talk about things. I mean, one of the most powerful moments, I think, is when you came back and gave that speech when everybody was celebrating the Cousins video game tournament, or, so I don't know. I know I'm asking maybe rapid fire things, but yeah, did you think that, oh my gosh, true crime has happened, or?
Yeah, at that moment, I was really concerned. And I think other people in the family were really concerned too. So eventually our family contacts the police, like, it's been a number of days. It's been, some time, and they contact the police in Seattle, and a missing persons detective gets on the case.
Wow.
Like that's what happens in a situation like this. Now, what was surprising was in like not that long, like maybe a week, this detective gets back to our family and says to them, okay, we found her. She's not being held against her will.
Wow.
And she doesn't want to talk to any of you.
What do you remember about that? What did that feel like?
It felt like what does this mean? Okay, so it's not true crime. It's not this sort of like she's kidnapped or anything like that. Like, okay, she just doesn't want to talk to us. So it left this strange feeling like, okay, she'll come back when she's ready, maybe, or how is this going to work? Because I understand the idea of like needing space or needing a break or wanting to like just, check out for a little bit. But what ended up happening was like years pass with that was the last word. And my brother Jared, who's a little older
Yeah.
than Sam, like gets super depressed. Sam is like stuffing his emotions and getting into this, he's really active in sports and he's got a lot of good friends, but he's also like, totally avoiding the whole thing until we like bring it up in conversation, and then we go on this road trip, and then it's like, okay, then it starts to unravel. He starts to look at it.
When
And
was there pushback about the road trip? And and it's interesting. I thought these quotes would make so much sense at the time I was taking them, and I think they're a little bit in chronological order. But I've got in here this interview with Jared, and the question, does it feel like she doesn't care? And I think he said sometimes, but it still doesn't fit because she never had acted this way before. And I felt like you did a nice job capturing him just trying to make sense of this thing that doesn't make sense. And I think that we just want that. Our brain is so adorable that way. If I can make sense of this, then I will feel better. But I don't know if that's possible, at that age or with the way that it played out. Yeah.
Yeah, that was something that stuck with me, is like, it didn't make sense to me either. And hearing it from Jared, it's like, Jois was like the original, primary attachment for both of those kids, I would say. Like, she was there, she was present, she rocked them as babies. And Jared was probably, of Jared and Sam, probably a little more tightly bonded with her. Like, they just really connected intellectually, and Jared was like the academic in our family. So like when Jois was gone, he shut off all that stuff. He just was like, I'm not going to do school. I'm not going to access that part of myself or something. I don't know exactly what was happening for him, but it appeared that way. And so
when you go to the attachment wound stuff, I always talk about, from a kid standpoint, everything is coming from their lens. And so they don't have necessarily this, I always say, little kids almost, or not even, he wasn't a kid, teenager, but they're almost like narcissistic by nature because the world is about them. So, they don't understand what other people's situations are. So then if somebody leaves, it must be me. I must be the problem. And it just breaks my heart for that, because it's hard to not view that from your own lens as then if I would have done something better, if I would have, and that's somebody that's worked with a lot of teenagers. I can even have a couple get a divorce and you go back in their 30s or 40s and say, okay, now that is there still a part of you that still could find yourself saying, yeah, but if I would have been a little cooler, if I maybe would have cleaned my room up a little bit more, or if I would have, even if they know that's not the case. And I feel like that just shows like how deep those attachment wounds could be. And so, I wondered when I was watching that, I felt like I was trying to look behind his eyes and see if that was, him trying to process that. And I often feel like when somebody stops doing things they were good at, that it is that proverbial cry for help of, I don't know how else to get anybody to notice that I'm in pain. But then you go to try to help them, and then I don't want the help. Did you feel like that was happening with Jared?
Yeah, I think that, like what you described at first was like confusion, like he was just severely confused by how his mom could do this in this way. And it was like, but he had no way to get any resolve on that.
None.
And then Sam did more or less the opposite thing. Like, he didn't lean into his confusion. He just avoided it completely.
Yeah.
And so both of those brothers were like having really different experiences through this. And they also pushed each other apart because they were, Sam viewed Jared as sort of depressed and negative energy. And Jared viewed Sam as kind of this like toxic optimist,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so they were just sort of repelling each other at the same, when they're having this totally shared trauma.
Yeah. Well, and if I read through it, and I'll maybe just blast through, here's the next quotes that I have, I think are so fascinating. This Ned, cousin, says, the way situation with Jois has been dealt with, it hasn't been dealt with, and it seems malicious. They'll be dealing with it the rest of their life. Then I've got in here, and I didn't catch her name of her, the aunt. I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to step on toes, and then this comment, the best thing for Randy, your dad, to do was to ignore it. And Dad choosing not to sue or anything for child support. And then Randy saying, and man, I had so much empathy for him, especially by the end but in that moment he said she was a good mother to her kids. And then, I have in my notes, other than the fact that she disappeared off the face of the planet, So, I mean, so I feel like that almost gives that vibe of we kind of don't talk about it. We kind of want to polish it up a little bit. Don't want to make anything awkward or step on anybody's toes. And I felt like that you just did such a nice job of in this real quick moment of encapsulating how the family maybe deals with things. And I love hearing, I mean, it breaks my heart, but hearing how you say even the two brothers having the shared trauma, it's this complete polar opposites. So that's so much right there happening. You know?
Yeah. A lot of when you get into family dynamics
Yeah.
really quickly, there's like a lot of them going on. You know, there's a lot of different connection points and ways that, you know, people are affecting each other. So yeah, this is strange. It's like, you know, here's one part of my filmmaker brain is like, let's make these playful films, and another is like, what's going on here? You know, and the what's going on here led me into this family silence concept. Like, why don't we address, you know, it's clearly uncomfortable for everyone in the family.
Yeah.
Why can't we like get into it together and figure out ways to create connection? And I think that you know, there were closed door conversations, but we weren't able to bring Sam and Jared into the collective discomfort of the situation in a way that would maybe help them see that like they weren't so alone.
Yeah. Man, and again, you did an amazing job of capturing all that, because it was such an amazing experience watching all that play out. Meanwhile, as you, this playful filmmaker, it just was, I can't even tell you. Again, the therapist in me, the movies are my happy place, and then loving documentaries. I don't think there could be a better combination. And then I like what you said, that collective discomfort, because I talk so often on my podcast about when that concept alone, what do we do with our discomfort? You know, do we ignore it? Do we tell other people it isn't a big deal? And then I think later in the film, it really comes up with that saying, hey, if you didn't have a way to express your emotions, that it's really difficult to then try to just all of a sudden pull that up as an adult. I mean, it's so wild.
Yeah, and it's something, I mean, I wrestled with it personally too, you know, so it's like, there's a lot, I've found as we've shown this movie to audiences, you know, like that's one of the things that people agree with the most, or like, you know, it's something that I think exists in most families, and it's something that it's almost strange that we, at least in Western culture, haven't figured out a way to evolve and do this. I actually don't know the answer. I just notice it as here's this part of families where I would say this is where seeds are planted for more problems to arise.
Yes.
And it's just fertile ground for more problems for anyone. And I was just saying, like, okay, this person only, but like,
well, Reid, that's avoidance. Where I mean, I got to tell you that again. I'll stop saying the therapist in me, but there's a concept that we talk about so often in therapy where we often say, okay, I don't want to repeat patterns of my parents. And then you get to a certain point and you're like, holy cow, I'm basically my dad or my mom. And then in this world of differentiation, which means, you know, where one person ends, the other begins, we're almost like by default, maybe one level differentiated from a parent. And the only way to really change a dynamic or become a transformational figure and is to go through severe trauma or go really do a deep dive in your own, you know, therapy. And that's where I feel like had you and Sam not done this, I mean, and that's what I think I'd emailed you yesterday when I just said, I am so excited to talk to you about this. And I shared a couple of quotes there that we'll get to, but had you not done this, then it would have just repeated the pattern. And then, so it takes something big to then shift it shifts an entire family dynamic or family system. And that's why I just felt like this is so powerful, or else people just continue. Because when you said, man, you're observing it as the therapist, again, I go back to that. What do we do with our discomfort? And too often we want to tell ourselves, I don't want it to be uncomfortable for the person that's going through the problem, but that's about me not wanting to be uncomfortable, you know? So then we just say, well, I don't want to bother that person. And I remember a neighbor of mine's wife died when I was in grad school, and I did 10 years in computer industry before I went back to be a therapist. And I remember one of the first times I thought, oh, this is powerful, was everybody was just going up and, hey, let me know if I can do anything. And I remember thinking, okay, everybody's just saying these platitudes because they're thinking, I don't want, he's already dealing with enough. And I remember I just had a class on grief, and I just said to him, "Hey, what is this like?" And then, the guy just broke down. He's like, "This sucks. I never anticipated this, and it was just felt like you could tell it was such a cathartic or a relief for him to be able to express himself. Because when we keep everything in our head, it just swirls around, and it can devolve into the negative, and it takes a life of its own. And then we typically default to it's a me thing and what's wrong with me. And I just feel like, man, the shared experiences and just being able to talk is so powerful. And again, that's why now I want to promote your film as a mandate before, going to therapy or, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a movie that doesn't have any, I'm not a qualified therapist, and nobody in the movie is,
Yeah.
that I know of. But that's what's really neat about it. It's following these chains of curiosity that I have as filmmaker,
Yeah.
through a very long amount of time. It's like over like 2.5 decades of me following these chains of curiosity. And, sometimes what's really interesting about the movie, I think, is that with that time lapse view
Yeah.
of growth, you can really see these moments of like how age and time like affects the individuals in the movie, including myself.
Yeah.
But it is so surprising. What you were saying, what hit me was like, okay, yeah, the curiosity and being able to just, I guess, help somebody feel seen,
Yeah.
is like,
Yeah.
that's certainly enough. But in this storyline, I kind of I go really far into, it's almost like this sort of like radical connection process with Sam. I'm just like, I'm gonna go all the way with you on this, really long road trip to, not knowing what we're gonna find, and be in this crazy place with you. And I think, like, I can kind of see where all of those things are coming from and why I
Right.
did all of the things. But like, also, the movie does get to a place where some of that storyline gets brought into question too.
Yeah.
Is that sort of compulsion for me to dive really deep into things?
Oh,
Like,
I see.
does that eventually create disconnection? And I do think that that's also true. Like, while I do feel super tightly bonded with my brother Sam, there's a point where like the filmmaking was getting in the way. And
Mhm.
like, it's not like I was kicking a dead horse, but it became a part of, and our relationship, like having the camera became a part of a relationship that was creating disconnection. It was no longer serving as sort of like, okay, this is a useful tool to help.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and man, that's right. Now I feel like I want to alleviate your discomfort, Reed, and tell you, I still go back to this: to be heard is to be healed, and I feel confident just from my experience sitting in the therapy chair for almost 20 years of that. If people don't get the stories out, that they don't eventually just work themselves out, that they grow and they grow and they become more negative, and it has more of a negative impact, in my opinion. But I hear you. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying there so much, because I have to ask you real quick too. Not real quick. I feel bad saying that, but now I realize I could talk to you for hours. And so when you guys met Jois, and again, you just went on this road trip, not even know if you would see her, and that scene, I wrote down these notes. Well, and I just have to say, I put in here Phil from Ray's Boathouse when he said she was a fascinating person, and I was sworn not to mention that she was leaving to anybody for months and months. And I don't know, did that feel like, when you heard that, was that did you feel angry or frustrated with that, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, there's a real mystery component in the movie, and I was playing like investigator at that point, and I
Okay.
was having to like really like
Man.
find information, and it's on camera. It's like I'm recording it so that I can go back, play back the tape to understand, okay, is there anything in here that gives us any clues as to where she might be?
Which is crazy,
And
because you're a teenager at that point, right? Trying to help
yeah,
your younger brother find his mom who disappeared, and then you got Phil saying, "Yeah, kind of wild. Huh? I've been keeping the secret for a long time." And then I've gotten the note there. Finally, got the name out of him. So here's shaking this out of this guy. That's wild if you put it in
yeah.
that context, Reed.
Yeah. So yeah, and there's like family secrets, and then there's like the secret, or sort of like, we don't talk about this, heavy stuff, and then there's all the other sort of pieces of like, oh, who might a person confide in, and like who, just this sort of like whole other, if there's an environment where, people don't feel comfortable being able to get through to like just have a platform for expressing like their discomfort, like you said, like then where does that happen? And
Absolutely.
It sounds like maybe in this situation it was like a coworker happened to be the one that was like, hey, I'll listen. And so this guy like, kind of lets me in on some stuff, and that leads us to this place of like, okay, this is like really early in like cell phone technology. It was like brick phones, but we were like, okay, we're gonna go meet this professor on his office hours, California State, Long Beach.
Well, that's what it was. That's right. Yeah.
We found his office hours, and we're like, we're gonna go meet him, and that would be like the maximum chance of making a first step toward connection with Jois, because we were pretty sure that this guy knew something about where she might be.
Man. And then that scene alone of, again, going there, and how let down or disappointed were you guys making that road trip with that uncertainty, and then finding that he was on a sabbatical of sorts, or what the receptionist said was he was on semi-permanent leave. Gosh.
Which, was also mysterious, but I guess sounds a little bit like Jois,
Boy. Okay, let me run through a couple of this. So then you meet with her, and I wrote these things too. I thought this was so interesting. She said, I see this as a way to control my relationship with you guys. Then she said, I had no control. I had to save myself. I had to get out of the control of everybody. I'll go down in history as the woman who broke a lot of rules, but I'm happy. And again, this is just my opinion, but then I feel like, man, that is, I can't imagine what that would be like for teenagers, for Sam, for you. And she felt, it appeared she seemed so very confident in what she was saying, and I know you have to edit, and I don't know how much or how long that conversation was, but was there empathy at first? I am so sorry. Or was it just, hey, here's the way it was?
The second thing. I think she immediately launched into that conversation as you saw it.
Man.
And, it's a really strange scene because, she's being really forthcoming to me and the camera.
Yeah.
And Sam is sitting right next to her, and he's pretty much like walling off and like, almost like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this right now. You don't have to, I don't need to hear this. And I think he actually blocked it out. Like, I think that he, in that moment was like, this is stuff that I don't need to hear. And, it was only later when we like watched the finished movie together that he was like, oh, wow, that's what she said,
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So almost like going into the defense mechanism there of just, I can't hear that, or I can't process that maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he like took away pieces of it, but his intention wasn't to do, my intention was like, I was sort of taking the weight of like, what you talked about with Jared, where it was like, how could she do this? And, trying to find some of those answers at the same time as just making contact. Right. And Sam's interest was more like, I just want to make contact. He said something like, it's not to like show that she's a bad person. It's like, it's just to like, make contact and like let her know that she's wanted or something like that, and I think that he was holding on to this energy that was just like, all I want is my mom back, and then things will be good, and we just can just like avoid all the stuff, like why did it happen,
ignore everything.
So it's really interesting, dynamics where it's like, okay, I'm really leaning into this place of like, well, what's going on? I'm also with Jois. I'm really leaning into tell me what happened, why, all that. And, I'm thinking of Jared. I'm thinking of, also for me, I also felt so confused by it and, really hurt by the experience because my family's all in turmoil over it. And I'm, I have my own mom who's represented in the movie.
Yeah.
But I also felt like it was just so, when you have a relationship with anyone and they're just gone, it's really strange. So I had a
Yeah, 'cause I
lot of
don't think many
curiosity.
people can. Yeah, people can. I don't think many people would experience that at all. That just
But
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
but what I want to say is I was holding on to mostly this trip and this trying to connect with Joyce was about like Sam and Jared, and I was really holding their wishes first as like,
Uh-huh.
okay, Sam wants to connect with her, Jared wants answers. And so I'm trying to get answers while also not burning a bridge,
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah.
and which is a really
Wow.
hard line to walk because what she's saying in that moment was really hard to hear
I
and
bet.
like really infuriating because it's like I'm happy now. And it's just
Yeah.
like what do I do with this? Like
Oh, Reid. And how old were you again at that time?
I think I was like 2021 something like that.
Wow. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
lot. That's a
But
lot.
it but
That
it
yeah.
yeah, and then that's like a another like entry point where I just like keep going with that,
Yeah.
what is this?
Oh. Well then okay, and I want to get to then maybe we got two poignant scenes or other things, and then I'll make sure I cover a lot of this even maybe more. I'll do a summary after our part where interview is done, but you said, okay, when I got home, we celebrated my cousin George's participation in a video game tournament. I think he took like fifth place. And you had expected this almost like this hero's welcome, and so confused that our family didn't want to acknowledge what had happened. That you had made contact with Joyce, who had been gone. And then I just wrote in here, Reid started talking, and you said everything was so heavy when Joyce's name was mentioned, and what had happened was one of the bravest things that you had ever seen, what Sam had done. And that is a moment, Reid. I mean, that scene just, and then I feel like everybody was all of a sudden, no, it was really good. Yeah, that was great. But do you remember can you just recall those feelings right now or?
Oh my God. I think that like every once in a while, like, I'll have an experience where I step up to like say something to people and that is resurrected in me a little bit. And I'm just
Okay.
like, I have no idea why I'm stepping up to say something right now, but I'm saying it. And you just recognize that you're like beyond in the moment. You're like transcending into like
Yes.
the moment of the moment. And you're like, holy crap, what is my body doing? What am I doing right now? And
Yeah.
this is one of those where I had no idea what I was going to say. I thought I was just going to start telling people the story of our road trip just so that they could have an education of like
Yeah.
what we just experienced.
Yeah.
But it became this like, I wouldn't say an eruption. I didn't get like
Yeah, I love what you're doing.
I
You
didn't
were trying to
but
hold the emotion
but
back, but it
but
couldn't.
but
It
it
wanted.
was
Yeah.
I realized that the discomfort, that we've been
Yeah.
talking about is like
Yeah.
so real that I had to kind of say it and then I had to go into it. I had to like embody
Yeah.
it. And I was just like, why is it so weird for us to have a conversation like this, in the moment? And like, why is it that the adults, these are the adults and I was one of the youth, why is it that I can see this and they can't, Like
Yeah.
I think there's I don't know if that's a common thing, but like
It is.
maybe
I
the
know. I like where
youth
you're going.
the
Yeah.
youth can see these things, like they can see where they're sort of like, okay, maybe the adults don't have the answers. Maybe they aren't the ones that like
That Reid.
know all the things. and
No, that's a
and
moment. Yeah.
yeah, so that's what was coming up for me is just like, oh, maybe they don't know, like maybe they're just like totally unaware of what I've just gone through and then what, Sam's gone through. So like what was, also just so charged is we keep things light, everybody's like, okay, video game tournament,
Hey,
easy. We're going to just laugh
like
and tell
fifth
jokes.
place. Yeah. Right. I mean, I love
And,
your
and
scene where you're like over his shoulder and somebody's like, "How'd you do?" He's like, "Oh, like fifth." I'm like, we
yeah,
just came back from a freaking road trip seeing Joyce, and we're celebrating.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also like I love George and I love that we're celebrating that too. But I think that you can see there's a shot of George is getting a cake,
Yep.
presented to him, and Sam's sitting right next to him,
Yes.
like in his still road trip clothes, basically, like just and he's just like looking up at this maternal character that's just like doing all of the normal mom things and just being like, I It's
So, okay.
so confusing.
So what you said though, what I think is so fascinating is when people have that moment where, oh, the adult people in my life don't actually have things figured out, and it may even be quite the opposite because there's a concept I talk about often. It's called confabulation, and it's creating a new narrative in essence to then so that I don't again have to deal with discomfort. So it's almost as if they can't acknowledge that you had the success with the elephant in the room. I mean, in my humble opinion, because then it's almost like in real time they would be processing. Wait, so we could have done something about this a couple years ago. We could have gotten some resolution. We could have helped somebody out, and here these guys just did it. And it's almost like, I can't. So I have to create the narrative of, how about George though, huh? That tournament was something. I feel like that's where we, because it usually is the younger person that then has actually done something that then this is where I just wish people could then, and later Sam talks about leaning into discomfort. I talk so much about this, Reid, accountability and ownership, and it's okay to say, holy cow, like I can't even believe you guys did that. I didn't think anybody could do anything. I didn't even think about doing anything, but that would cause somebody to really have to say, wow, I am so sorry that we didn't do more because you guys did and you got results, and that's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I started to see that shift, and I started to see, my Aunt Cindy especially was really appreciative, and I think it started to, I think that, one of the other things about this sort of discomfort space that we were in is that also the adults knew something that I wasn't aware of,
Yeah.
They knew some things about Jois that
Oh, okay.
I wasn't aware of, nor were Sam and Jared, and that there was probably levels of protection going on
I could see
for
that.
the kids around, some things that they knew about, but I still feel like it's just like, these are spaces where it's like, how do we start to have conversations like that earlier, like
Exactly. And that's what your film is it is going to cause that for other families. I recently had a couple that it was amazing, and they came on and talked about finding their daughter who had died of an overdose, and this couple laid out just the way that they wish they would have had some more conversations early. And I have to tell you, Reid, the feedback on that episode alone, I mean, has been overwhelming of how many people have said, okay, I just went and talked to my kid about, this or this, and that's where I feel like why this is just so powerful. I know I have to go, and I so apologize. I have to tell you a couple of things. I mean, maybe even if you'd be up for coming on and again at some point, but that you said some powerful, you even said it after that. I don't think she needed to leave you guys. I don't think you have to believe she did the right thing. And Sam said, I don't think there's a lot to be gained from thinking that she did the wrong thing. I mean, I could do a whole episode on that, and then there was a part where Jois, I mean, it was so interesting where she said, my mother and I never got along. We were always at odds. I always knew I was adopted. I was reminded that they had the option of sending me back to eat fish heads and rice at the orphanage. And you beautifully cut to the mom saying, I don't have any regrets. I mean, we never looked at her as being adopted. She was just one of the kids, Yeah. And I thought what a difference there. And then, I don't know, it was just so crazy. But then the thing I thought was so powerful was Sam saying, okay, here it was, a habit I picked up on. She wasn't very responsible with other people's feelings. And I was the same way for a long time, that I could be doing what my mom did to people, and that would be awful. And then he said a lot of it was being aware of the cycle you may be getting involved in, that I'm the one to make the decision to step out of that cycle, which I think is I don't feel like things like that happen unless, you do something like this, the movie, or bringing awareness to it. And then I love, this is where he just said, breaking up with a girlfriend, I wanted to ruin this before it goes bad. I wanted to step ahead and isolate myself. He said, I went to therapy, I was sober, and it dug up a lot. And then he said, I have to start leaning into that discomfort, or I'm going to be emotionally stunted my whole life, and I don't want that. And I just thought, man, but then, okay, I'm so sorry. Now I'm throwing everything out there because, I know that I told you before we started, I wish I wouldn't have set up a client. And I think when we were going back and forth too, I talked about the Waking Up to Narcissism podcast and then the virtual couch. And I'm going to run this on the virtual couch, but I'm going to also bonus it on the Waking Up to Narcissism, because you captured something that Jois said that I have already referred to. In the last 48 hours, so many times in sessions. But where Jois said, you need people to engage with you, and the only way you know how to do it is at this one level. You get into this spiral. It's like the Tasmanian devil. You get whipped up and you can't get out of it. It's like a toddler who can't get out of it until you have some type of catharsis. You end up hurting somebody or hurting yourself, and that stops it. that right there, I don't think I've ever, and this is the work I do, where, people will say, why on earth does the narcissist or the emotionally immature person always have to have a dust up or a row, or, they talk about the narcissistic supply, or why can't they take ownership, or why do they have to always have conflict? And I'm so grateful that you captured that, because that, I've never heard it put that way from the person themselves, saying that I had to just get in it. I had to mix it up. It's like the Tasmanian devil, and I had to either hurt somebody or I had to be hurt. And then I feel like that's the way the emotionally immature narcissist gets their sense of self, is through those kind of interactions, which leaves other people that I call them the pathologically kind, in this position where they feel like, oh my gosh, that, what's wrong with me that I can't be heard or seen, or I'll keep trying. And then the person like Jois, that's the way that she interacts. That's the dynamic I see so often with the work I do. And so the more that the person tries to give them the aha moment, the more the person in Joyce's position says, but this is the way I interact. And that is that's just such a destructive, relationship model. And so I think you're showing that alone, and us talking about it, I think is going to really help a lot of people. So I appreciate you showing that.
She's a really challenging character in the movie, but she's also a really giving character in the movie, and I'm really appreciative of what she continued to give. I think that my role with her in the making of the movie was helping her be seen, and which is a really hard one for somebody with those really big defense mechanisms, and there's so many protections. We all have so many protections, but I think she's somebody that's got really heavy protections, and for her to let me in was such a gift. I'm really appreciative.
Well, and that's where, and I appreciate you saying that, because by me saying this, and if it sounds like I'm saying I can't believe it, it's like, no, I've never seen it given the voice like that. And I made a decision early on in the Waking Up to Narcissism podcast to talk about, narcissistic personality disorder is a very small percentage of people, but I said that we're all emotionally immature, until we're not. And I feel like that's what's brought a lot of people to the podcast, is the ability to maybe do a little more self-confrontation if they can see themselves as more emotionally immature, because nobody wants to be told they're a narcissist. But then if we're looking at emotional immaturity, that's where I feel like, man, people are going to hear that quote alone, and they're going to say, I do that. And so that might be the start of a little more self-confrontation. And then here we've talked about throughout our interview here and your movie, a lot of concepts around discomfort. And that's where I feel like, man, if we don't bring awareness to that, but now all of a sudden we just equip people with tools about discomfort, generational trauma, and the way that people interact in a negative pattern. So that's where I'm like, man, Reid, let's change the world, my friend. Like, well done. And that's why I love the movie. So I can't recommend it enough.
Thank you so much. That was really well put. And I had no idea what I was doing making this. I was just like kind of following one bit of curiosity to the next, and I love all my family members, and there's a lot of wisdom that they bring. My grandmother brings this amazing piece of acceptance into the story too, which is a whole other piece. And it's like, we got it, stuff you're talking about. It's like, how do we be more accepting of ourselves? How do we be more accepting of others? And all these lines, a mother cannot leave her kids.
Right.
Like there's all these lines that exist in the world. And like, why are we so hard on mothers? Like, why is it okay for fathers to do that? Like, there's all these pieces. And then it's like, okay, if society or families have these narratives, what narratives are we stuck with individually,
Yeah, and you just help bring a lot of that. We talk about the shadow work, bringing it out of the shadows into the light, and that's where people can start to change. So I see this as so significant. So Reid, I appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you come back sometime.
Yeah, it was really great talking to you. Thank you for, like you said, doing the preparation work and getting, bringing.
It was a joy. Yeah. So I'd love to meet you in person sometime. And thanks for the work you do. And tell Sam that I'm grateful. And even again, that quote from Jois, that's going to help people. It really is. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Tony.
Reid Harkness, what a joy. Okay. Well, I have all the links to everything in all the show notes. Okay.
Sounds great.
Thanks,
okay.
Reid.
Bye.
Okay, take care.